Good afternoon, everyone. This is Laura Leone, author from Starseed Metaphysical Shop. I'm happy to have a chat here with Dr. Marc Hirsch today. And Dr. Hirsch is someone who I met on Facebook. And as a fan, I have read all of his Alice Investigator book series. I'm an investigator myself, so I had a high interest in this. And Dr. Hirsch, this is your debut interview here live on YouTube and Facebook. I just wanted to say thank you for joining me. And if there's anything you want to start off with in your background.
I was born in Manhattan just before the end of World War II, about a month before the end of the war with Japan. And I was born in Washington Heights, which is northern Manhattan. And I was brought home to the Bronx, where my main character lives. I gave her our apartments. The big moves were 4E to 4F to 6G. Each one had one more bedroom because we started out with the two kids, me and my sister, on the floor in the living room and a one bedroom apartment. And let's see. So how did I get started? There was a lot of excitement with the war being over. People were smiling and laughing, and there was a lot of obvious relief. I watched that as a little kid, and I didn't appreciate how severely damaged lives were by both the depression that preceded World War II, that my parents had grown up in, and my own, and I just didn't have an idea of the intensity of that until I got older and read about it and felt badly about not listening to my dad about the value of a dollar and having food on the table. So anyway, I just at 14 years old, I decided that I was going to be a doctor, and I thought I was kind of thinking I would be able to give psychological help to people, maybe as a minister or a rabbi. But I thought about being a doctor. I thought that would be more help, even spiritually, and it turned out, in my experience, that it really did a lot of good for me to be in that profession. And so I have a lot of fondness for the Bronx in the 1950s, and that's how I set my character. Um, when I was approaching retirement from medicine, I thought I better get something that was engaging, and I started writing. Started writing. First, I collected. I didn't set out to write fiction. I set out to write my memoirs because
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of things happen to me in my life that were, I thought, going to be incredibly entertaining. And I read my memoirs back to myself and thought, this is terrible. I got really depressed about my inability to express my own history in an engaging way. And so I went to a fiction writing seminar on Cape Cod, and I met the guy who became my mentor, Rich Crevelin. He was teaching at UCLA and USC, and he is a screenwriter. And he told me the only person who's going to read my memoirs is me, and that I might consider writing fiction and using my memoirs in my fiction. And that's kind of what I did. That's how I ended up doing this. So I started writing this my first book in my on-call room, and then I went out to California. I went to Southern California because I had lived for maybe 20 years in Northern California, and and made friends with this guy. And he helped me for a while, and then told me that all I had to do is keep writing. But he basically, you know, reminded me that it's just like screenwriting, writing engaging fiction. That if I that I, it, that if I tell, it's the old adage, show don't tell, rather than describe things, um, uh, characteristics of characters and things like that, demonstrate them. And so I got the knack of that pretty quickly. And it's funny because around the time I started writing, there was the girl with the dragon tattoo came out, and and we had a big discussion about how difficult it was to get through the first 200 pages of that book. And the first 200 pages dealt with the trial of this main protagonist, Michael Bloomquist, and
Hmm.
not one scene of the courtroom was included in the those first pages. And I noticed that the movie made of it started at the end of the trial, and that's where the action came in. So that's kind of what Rich did for me. And every time I acknowledge him in all my books, for having given me a start. So
That's amazing. I'm sorry. What part of Northern California were you in? Because I'm in the Sacramento area and originally from San Diego.
let's see, I went to San Francisco in 1969, and when I graduated medical school, and I went there to do my internship. And I was interviewed about my writing some years ago, and the guy told me to lead with this story because while I was, whenever I'm interviewed, I should tell the story about me being in San Francisco in 1969, and a doctor, an established doctor in the community, not in training, uh, came up to me and said, "Do you know the American Indians of all tribes has taken over the deserted island of Alcatraz as a protest for all the lands that were taken from the American Indians, and also for this policy that I had no idea about, which is called assimilation, which is the end of tribal culture and the assimilation of American Indians into uh, American culture." And a lot of the men on the island were veterans of Vietnam, and many of them had done long stretches in prison. And he said, you could lose your license, and you could do jail time behind going out there to help them, but they need medical help. And I was facing Vietnam myself, and I felt like my life was over because I wasn't leaving the United States to avoid the draft myself. And not that I had anything or had anything against that, people who did. I just didn't. I didn't feel that way about my own life, and so I said, "Yeah, I'll go." And so a different person that I'd never seen before would come up to me in the halls of the hospital because my picture was on the wall with all the new doctors that were had arrived.
Yeah.
They just handed me a number on a piece of paper, and I'd go to that number of the on the Embarcadero, and a fishing boat would pick me up and take me out to trip. Different person every time. And that was a beautiful time in my life, just seeing these people. They wouldn't let me see anybody medically without a medicine woman at my side approving what I advised them. And they took me on a tour of Al Capone's cell and the island of Alcatraz. And by Thanksgiving, which was weeks of me going over there were doctors everywhere were volunteering to take my place. And on Thanksgiving Day, I remember the actor Anthony Quinn was visiting, and we stood and had turkey with a bunch of um, a bunch of the occupants of the island, and that was my last day. I was glad to stop doing that and move on to the rest of my career, but I wrote that story is one of my major memoirs, and it came out so flat and so unexciting. And you can get a taste of how that is. There was Thanksgiving Day. Everyone was wearing paint, and there were these vast headdresses, and they were banging on their drums like crazy, and it still gives me a adrenaline rush just to remember that. And so I moved on, and I eventually had to deal with the military, um, and I couldn't. They kept interrupting my training and drafting me, and then rescinding the draft until I realized that they were going to take me. And if I was going to die, which most guys my age believed that going to Vietnam was going to be the end of life, we never envisioned being taken prisoners or tortured. We just envisioned the end of our life. And in
Yeah.
fact, there was a guy named Country Joe. Uh, his group was Country Joe and the Fish, and they sang a song about it. Uncle Sam's got himself in a terrible jam um, down in a place called Vietnam. Whoopee, we're all going to die, and that's really an expression of how I felt about it anyway. And eventually, they said, "Go, we're not taking you." And I did go up to Canada, and I went to live on an island by myself, a small island off the coast of British Columbia, and I stayed there for a couple of years alone. And I fixed up a cabin that had been abandoned. I put a floor into it and a sleeping loft off of it, and bought myself a stove that I brought back from Vancouver, and I was happy. I think it's one of the happiest times of my life. I fished and I dug for clams and oysters, and I was happy. The noise was killing me. The society, being in the Bronx when I was a kid, it was
Yeah.
just a lot to deal with. But I always look back, and when this guide requested that I write a chapter of fiction, I thought of my older sister, and we didn't have air conditioning when we were kids. So what we do is get out of the hot apartment and get out onto the fire escape. And so I have her sitting on the fire escape with a glass of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other hand, and that's the beginning of chapter 5 in my first book. And I had to create a whole scene about why she was out there, why she was shaking, what had upset her, and I built it backwards, and told the story. And that was how it happened. She calls herself Alice sometimes. My sister does.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's where the name of Alice, your main character, came from.
Well, she's my sister's name is Nancy,
Okay.
but now that she knows that Alice is modeled after her, she calls herself Alice sometimes as a joke. And anyway, so that's how I got started, and it just grew, and I got better at writing, like he said I would, and and I didn't use very many um, reference people in that first book, but I certainly did in my second book. I got myself a local police detective to advise me,
Oh, that's great.
and,
So
and
you befriended this police detective as your as
yeah.
your book research.
Right, and he's a notorious martial artist, a really well known martial artist, and he said he would sit down with me and hash out the plot of my second book called Hard Case, if I would promise to go home and afterwards and change into something loose and come to his martial arts studio, and he wanted to show me a few things. By this time, I had had two black belts in Korean martial art, and he knew that, but he wanted to then show me Bruce Lee's Wing Chun, which came to the United States in the 1950s, I think, came to New York City actually, and so we bonded over that, and he gave me a great couple of tips about the police officers in my story, And I went thinking that he was going to demonstrate on someone else, but he didn't have that in mind. I thought I was way old because I got my second degree black belt in my 50s, and almost killed me. And and he almost killed me that day. I went to his studio. When I came home, my wife looked at me and said, "You look like he threw you in a swimming pool." I said, "No, he just demonstrated on me with me and showed me the art and had me work with him." And it was so exciting. I almost regretted training the way in the arts that I did, because I understood finally a lot about Bruce Lee and what he was talking about when he said "flow like water," things like that. So all of that is in my books. That, and I have a gunsmith who consults and reads over what I wrote about firearms in my stories, and sometimes sarcastically said, "This is not the way you don't want to do this," and also gave me some great suggestions about. I have a bank robbery in one of my books, and two bank robberies, and he talked to me about the firearms involved and who would have what, and also some wonderful action stuff about using a shotgun. So I've been interested in all that stuff, and I don't fight anymore. I started out as a boxer before I ever heard of or thought about doing martial arts, and
Really?
yeah, and I counsel men now. In and out of prison and jail, and about life on the outside. A lot of people are more comfortable locked up, more than I thought it would be. I was a doctor in jails in my early career in California, actually, a holding facility for San Quentin, for people on their way to San Quentin. And so I had I sometimes felt more comfortable in jail, just because I had a traumatic youth.
Uh, yeah. I
Time.
don't. You don't have to get into that if you don't want to. But
No,
um,
thank you so much.
yeah, what did you learn about working there in that jail holding facility? Like,
When that saying, when you don't have anything, you got nothing to lose. It just felt good to be able to surrender to these guys snapping my neck and saying, "Whoops." I just felt comfortable. I felt um, protected. These guys, I knew if anything bad was going to happen to me, they'd protect me. I
yeah,
just had that affinity with street people. I think part of that. I thought about it sometimes and occasionally. I was tested right after World War II. Intelligence was really important because they wanted an educated uh, bunch of Americans. The more educated, the more able people seemed to be, and I failed my first intelligence quotient examination. I came out with a single digit number, IQ of like 3, and they put me in with all the juvenile delinquents, and that's what started me. I didn't at home was a little rough, so I felt comfortable with these kids. They smoked and they drank before they were 10 years old, and I didn't smoke and I didn't drink except religiously, in religion, but I got the idea. I learned how to pick the locks on cars, on and they were easy in the 1940s and 50s. Um, and I just felt at home with people who could handle themselves on the street, you know, and so I like to express that in my writing, And I didn't know I could write like I do now,
hmm
I write when I write like a manuscript. I have my fifth book in under. It's almost done. I mean, it's written front to back, but I do 8 to 10 to more drafts of the writing because I know I can do better. I just
Yeah.
keep going. And when I read it and I think I can't do any better, I have to at least cry once during reading my own manuscript, and I have to also laugh once at least. And I feel like I've done my job, you know. And so that's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely achieved that. And I read your full four books via audiobook, which I highly suggest. And I'll put links below in the comments for your audiobooks as well. And, I like the audiobooks because I can just work in my home office here and ping away and type away, and then also listen to, the audiobook at the same time, and then read it within a day, like 5 hours or however long the books are here and there. So I highly recommend the audiobooks, especially for the series. In hearing the audiobooks, I realized that your books would look well on screen as a movie. Have you thought of that since you're friends with the screenwriter and, going the movie route and doing a screenwriting, or is that something that's like in the back burner for you?
Well, that's funny you should mention that because not the screenwriter who taught me about basically about writing, but my neighbor's son was a screenwriter. And he wrote many of the episodes of Little House on the Prairie, and he's kind of a spiritual kind of Christian flavor to his writing. And he's gone now. He died about a year or so ago. His name was Paul Cooper, and he was visiting his mother, and he had read my book. I think she sent him my first book, and he said to me, "Write a screenplay of this, and I'll look it over and make it." And that's exactly what I did. I got a book on screenwriting. He turned me on to the script of Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman.
Mm-hmm.
He said, read this over, see how it is, and it turned out to be the best of that first book because I wasn't thrilled with the prose. I've written it over a little bit, but I wasn't thrilled with the prose. But if all there is the action and the dialogue, it's a great book. The rest of it was just me learning how to write, and it's not bad. I've gotten people who gave it 5-star reviews, but still, I learned about screenwriting, and I just didn't want to. I did my writing in prose, and I like that. Um,
What's your website, Dr. Hirsch? I'm going to type it in
it's
here.
It's www.marc, M-A-R-C, Hirsch, Hirsch, all small letters, no space between the names, MarchHirsch.com. And it's being remodeled. If you look at it now and then check it out in, I don't know, a couple of weeks maybe, I sent you previews of what it's going to look like, but it's going to be multiple pages and showing off my the audio books, the ebooks, and I must say that I pay myself way better than Amazon does, although Amazon gets a lot of business, and Audible does too. Um, and I just want to be read and listened to. I don't really. I'm not looking to make my fortune in my writing career. I also started painting, which goes way back to 1969 when I arrived in San Francisco, and I just had knew nobody. I got a house on Stanyon Street, which is the base of the Panhandle. Of It's the street that forms the base of the Panhandle and the main part of Golden Gate Park. And
Mm-hmm.
so I experienced my first earthquake, a full blown whopper standing on the street outside Golden Gate Park. But I got myself a sketch pad and I went all over San Francisco because I arrived early for my internship and I set up my house and I had nothing to do but walk around the city. And what a beautiful city it is. Um, I know that it's changed a lot since 1969, but it's always going to have a place in my heart. So, yeah, I did the Japanese tea gardens. I went and did the portraits of the drawings with just pencil drawings of a lot of places in San Francisco. And so I picked it up again in my later life and did periods of sketching, and now I'm into it. I do watercolors and I do acrylics, and I'm going to sell them on my website too.
Yeah, that's great. I saw some of your paintings on the performing arts group that I have on Facebook, and they're beautiful. I mean, you have a hidden talent that maybe you kind of awoke again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have this energy. I mean, my last job was 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. It was the best job I ever had. I worked in a hospital. I didn't have to take any weeks off for vacation if I didn't want to. And believe me, they were looking for, it was a town in Kentucky where I'm living now, but it was just far enough so they couldn't find a lot of doctors to do that. And they'd fly them here and give them a place to stay. But anytime I wanted, I could take a week or even two off and travel or just take a break. And it's a beautiful job. I got to use every factoid I ever had in my head about medicine. I mean, I've never worked so hard and loved it as much. Uh,
That's great. And I also read on your bio that you have done or do bartending. What? How did you get into the bartending? And is it like a hobby or something that you like to
well,
do?
I've had a lot of experiences in my during my vacation times at bars, and I sort of and I watched bartenders, and I saw a lot of great ones, just great conversational people, and I like to talk to people. I like to talk, but I also love to meet new people, and I wanted to get technically good at it, so I went to a bartending school in Tennessee, which is just south of us, and I got a job in Nashville as a bartender. Talk about moving fast. And that's what I did, and I loved it. I loved the interaction. In fact, I was at the Performing Arts Center in Nashville, and I got there's a bar actually in the audience, in the back of the audience, so you get to watch the show. And I love that one, but they rotated us. They didn't want us to get stale.
Uh, that's funny. And I can imagine that, Nashville, which I've never been, I think the closest I've been is like Columbia in the Carolinas. But I've heard that Nashville is quite like the party town and like the place to be. Like if you want to go, well, yes, for music, but, for like bars and stuff. So I can imagine that you had that really like amped up environment to get you going, right? When
Yeah,
you're out of the hospital or the clinic or, retired from your 7 day a week thing, right?
yeah. I used my last vacation before I fully retired to learn to bartend. I went to a bartending school. They speed was everything. They timed you. My wife drilled me in public places. She said, "I can't say some of the names of these drinks, but how do you make such and such real quick? Boom, 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 boom." She kept drilling me until I was ready to take my test. And it was fun. It was a fun thing to do, but I moved on. I did the last thing I did was a wedding of a doctor and a nurse I know. And I said, I want to retire. And they said, you're not retiring until you do our wedding, and then you can retire. So I did. It was fun. It was really fun. But I was into this other stuff. And
Oh, that's great. And as far as your black belt in karate, like, I know nothing pretty much about karate or taekwondo or any of that stuff. Karate's Chinese, I believe, right? And did you do any tournaments or anything like that? And did you think about tournaments? And how does it work with second degree versus first degree and all that?
well, yeah, I did it to get exercise. I was in New York from the West Coast, and I had to start again. Also, they were requiring that every doctor get board certified because they were taking medicine away from doctors and handing them to the insurance companies. And the only way the insurance companies knew how to gauge whether you knew anything was to make board certification a, a requirement for insurance, and so they wouldn't just allow me to sit down for the exam. They actually insisted that I do a full residency, and I had been at that point in my life. I had been out of medicine for a number of years, doing other things. You get a thread in my life, and so I became the chief resident of this residency, and I went into private practice, and that was in New York, and I sat for my boards, and I was board certified, and it was okay. I think I got spoiled by my earlier trauma experience in California. Running an emergency room by myself, and I think I was 25 years old, the first time I was left alone in an emergency room in a fairly large county in California. And that's when I also started going to the jails. Um, and I just I loved hands on. I think I would have become a surgeon if a friend of mine who was a surgeon hadn't developed a tremor in his hands, and I couldn't. I knew I was never going to save a dollar. Little did I know I would end up marrying a woman who trained me to save a dollar. But at the time, I never thought anybody would. I'd spend everything I had, so I would not have any money when I was 80 years old. I'd still be practicing medicine, and I didn't. If I developed a tremor like my friend, I thought I would. I didn't think I'd make it, so I let it
Yeah.
scare me into internal medicine. And I thought internal medicine was not as effective as surgery. I think it was crazy. I did a lot of good stuff as a doctor, as an internist or family doctor, they called me.
So legally you're not giving medical advice here, but in general terms, as far as what's going on nowadays with GMO, non-organic, heavily what I think toxic foods from which I learned from my integrated medicine doctor, who's an MD, but she's integrated medicine. She warned me about a lot of things, and I kind of thought she was exaggerating, like about the GMOs and organic and Roundup sprayed in wheat and all these high sugar cereals. And the more I looked into it, the more I went down the rabbit hole. The more I realized that maybe there's something to this. So in 2019, 2020, we did an overhaul on health, and my husband was a type 2 diabetic, over 50 back then, and I had diabetes in my family too. My grandpa, like his grandpa, in their 60s, early 60s, died, and we're both alcoholics and died of diabetes. And I know type 2 is totally preventable and all that, and but still just to be aware of it. Basically, we did an overhaul in all of our lifestyle, gave up dairy, gave up meat other than seafood, pescatarian, no dairy, no high carb, very little processed sugar, if any. We go to Sprouts, Farmers Market, no high fructose corn syrup. And I lost about 25 pounds, and my husband lost about 35 pounds. And now he's off all his sugar pills, for diabetes. He also runs 10 miles a day, even though he's 58, and does like a boxer's workout, which is interesting because you started out, doing boxing. So, is there anything to this? Because I'm seeing a lot of benefits from being mostly organic, mostly non-GMO. The lower processed sugar, the lower carbs. Is it really is it really as good as I think it is, or am I just eating healthier and it's happening?
Well, I have a lot of, it's a, oh God, I don't know where to start. I think I've learned more about medicine since I retired, and I've got considerably large. I got considerably overweight. I'm sort of embarrassed about my before picture, but I keep it. And once in a while, I will show it to somebody. But it's awesome. I did not think that anybody would ever follow a diet of any kind of restrictions. And so I never really told even my diabetic patients to eat any particular way. Now, because of my largeness, I'm not large anymore.
Mm-mm.
I'm way thin now, and I intend to stay that way. Um, but I don't want to encourage anybody to do what I do. But I will say that if I knew what I know now, I would not have poured hundreds of gallons of insulin into my diabetic patients. I would have really told them that this is curable, and all these extra medicines, the incredibly expensive things, um, that you don't need to do that, but you do need to do something, and it's you have to change the way you eat. And you described a lot of things that I know now are effective. The thing about medicine that I saw before I had any idea that anything to do with diet would affect anything was that the standard of care is something leaned on by people who are not doctors, but who are insurance people, and they use the standard of care to judge whether you're practicing good medicine. And the standard of care says, low fat and high carbs, and that's exactly the opposite of what you used. And I did not use high carbs. I'm on a zero carb diet. I really just strictly eat meat and eggs, and that's it. I don't eat bread or fruits or vegetables or anything like that. But that's my own personal thing, and my family does not eat the way I do. You know, my wife has become thin based on just carbs. Just lowering carbs, and she's maintained it a lot longer than I have. She actually helped me get large clothing because I was just bursting out of my clothes, and she said, you look slimmer if you wear bigger, larger clothes. Raise my hands, and she would blouse my shirts out, and people would say, "God, you don't look overweight," and like that. So I mean, this is a so that asks poses the question: um, what can you do if you're a doctor that whose patients are owned by the insurance companies? And
Mhm.
the answer is you break out and you stop taking insurance. But who can afford you? Because as last time I looked, it was $1,000 for the first visit with a doctor who doesn't take insurance, and then after that, it's a certain number of hundreds of dollars for follow up visits. And those are the doctors that are talking about carnivore and low carb and all that stuff,
Keto.
and not taking
Yeah.
cholesterol medicine, because the whole the idea that fat causes heart attacks and that you need a low fat diet is the exact opposite of what people are finding. And the research, the money is not there for research per se, but the anecdotal stories are incredible, and I am living proof that you can live a healthy life without fruits and vegetables, and without cholesterol medicine, which is what my doctor is a standard doctor, and she believes in loading anybody up with a cholesterol over 100. Of course, they used to be 200, now it's 100.
What? 100? That's ridiculous. Because I'm 173, and when I went pescatarian vegan, my cholesterol was 227, and now it's 173, which is really good. And my triglycerides went from like 158 to like 78, and I'm happy with that. So I'm not sure when the cholesterol 100 thing started, but that sounds kind of ridiculous just to kind of justify and move the goalpost for big pharma.
Well, I don't like to talk about that because it's none of my business, honestly. About I want people to do well, including big pharma, and so I have no political feeling about that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really, and I'm certainly not. I don't tell people how to eat. If they ask me, I mention it, and like I just did, and leave it alone. I don't sell it because it's just too it's too personal, and I don't, like I said, I don't know anybody in my family who eats like I do, and I don't recommend it to anybody. Not just as a person, not as a doctor even. And so, it's out there, and when I was ready, I found it. A guy named Jason Fung in Toronto. He's a kidney doctor and a nephrologist, and he promotes intermittent fasting, whatever cuts it. So
Yeah, that's true. Everybody's so unique that what works for one what works for one person won't work for another, and it's not like a cookie cutter approach, like you're saying.
yeah, and ultimately it's up to the individual person. But like I said, I might, if I was still practicing, recommend that people look into the various diets that are around that are not mainstream, and um, you know and I just don't like getting into this. Life is too short. I'm getting older, and I value friendship.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Because a lot of people fight over food, like vegan versus non-vegan, and
Yeah,
meat and not meat. And even though I'm mostly vegan and I still eat seafood and plant-based, I support anybody if they want to be like carnivore or whatever they want to do. Try
yeah.
not to judge, and it's up to them. Whatever works for them. Obviously, a lot of the less sugar, less carbs, a lot of that just common sense, right? And I tell people if they ask me, well, how did you lose weight? Well, even if you just cut dairy or even if you just cut carbs, you'll probably be okay. Because my brother-in-law is asking me, he's like, I don't want to give up meat. And I'm like, you don't have to give up meat. But if you watch your carbs, processed sugar, like a lot of that's just common sense, right?
Well,
So
there are people out there that coach. There's a woman named whose nickname is Carnivore Doctor, and she has a regular practice, and then she has this practice. This is kind of an alternative, practice. But there are coaches around that'll do that, just like there are weightlifting coaches. There are other, you know, that kind of thing. And yeah, so I'm so excited that you asked me to come and talk with you. And I, I'm not. I'm trying to think of what else is on my
yeah,
list.
if you don't mind, Dr. Hirsch, just talking a little bit about your new book, I mean, without obviously uncovering the whole premise of your book, and then we'll wrap it up. But because I'm excited as a fan, and I'm definitely going to buy it and read that one because I read the other four.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, each of my books is autobiographical. Uh, to a large extent. It either has to do with a section of my life or a section of my parents' lives or something like that. And this one is about that island that I lived on for a couple of years. And they, the woman, I delivered I was there in the woods trying to hide from the world, and some woman and her husband showed up and said, they're pregnant, and they're about 8 months pregnant, maybe 7 months pregnant, and would I deliver the baby in the woods?
Hmm.
And I said, go to the city, rent a room or something, or stay with friends. And it's a lot safer to do it near a hospital or with a hospital. There's no hospital on this island. It's 10 miles long and 3 miles wide. And just in case as a backup. And they said, well, we're not going. And if you don't deliver this baby, no, we'll do it ourselves. So she and I, this is like 50 years later, we're good friends. And she still lives on that island. And her baby that I did deliver is now 50 something years old. And she has children of her own. And, and it was one of the highlights of my entire life, let alone being a doctor. It was just incredible. It's beautiful. how did I get talking about them? Oh yeah, this story.
The
So
book, yeah.
yeah, so she asked me to please not mention the name of the place. So I changed it. She said use Vasquez Island. So that's what I did. I made it Vasquez Island. Meanwhile, she has answered my questions about what it would be like back in the 1950s when the stories take place. And she's given me great, invaluable descriptions of whole things. Because when I lived there, I had no electricity of any kind. I had no plumbing. I hauled my own water and I cut my own firewood and I did my own fishing. And I think if I had sprained my ankle, I could have died because I didn't see people for months. And then then I would need some supplies, either hardware or kerosene or something. And I would go into Vancouver and work at a clinic for some guy who said, please, every time you come near here, call me and I'll stay home with my wife and you can take my place. And that's what I did. I got a Canadian medical license and they paid me for the prenatal care, for the delivery, and a little postnatal care. They paid me $200, the government of British Columbia. And that was the most honest money I ever made in my life. That was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And like I said, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, I brought my wife up there to meet this woman and her child and her grandchildren, and to see the island, and it was just wonderful.
That's amazing, Dr. Hirsch. When I was stationed in Alaska in the Air Force in the early 2000s, I drove through the Yukon Territory and Alberta, and it's a beautiful country, Canada. And I only saw the west, being from the west coast, the west side of it, not the east side. Although I've always wanted to go to Quebec and go there and eat the French food and see what's going on with Niagara Falls. I haven't made it up that far in that way,
That's
but
pretty
it
exciting.
is beautiful. It's a beautiful, country, and it is cold. It is cold though. I think it was like -8 when I drove through in February.
I promise I'll tell a little bit about this story. Okay, the story is that that I knew that a bunch of businessmen came out and anchored off the coast of this island I lived on, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMPs, didn't particularly patrol this island. It was absent. So they would smoke dope and they would take pills and they would drink a lot and and then they'd go home. So that inspired this story that um, one of these guys, and they'd come onto the island. In the days when I lived there, there was no inn, but there is now. So I just transported the inn back to the 1950s, and they dropped in and had dinners there, and so on. And they had enough room for people if there was a bad storm to be able to get in and out of it. And so I collided all of this with a bad storm, and the businessman, and of course, one of them gets killed, is murdered. And that's the core of the story. And Alice is waiting to finish to get her results of her bar exam that she's taken in New York. So she leaves Manhattan with her boyfriend, and they come to this island to because he read about it in some book or something. He is based on a dear friend of mine who is a builder, and and I use him. He knows that it's him. It's kind of funny. And he takes her, and they're on the island, and they get offered by the innkeepers and by the islanders a fee for her to figure out who the murderer is, who the killer is, and that's the basis of the story. That's all I'm going to say.
that
Except,
that's amazing.
yeah, and I think I may go out to the island and do a book signing on the island. I'm back and forth about it with my wife. She would go if we wanted to, but I'm not sure. We'll see. but it's just fun. And I'm now in their Facebook group, so
Oh,
I let them
good.
know how it's going, and then they're thrilled that
That's good. Yeah,
they're.
you're putting them on the map, Doctor Hirsch, because I'm
Well,
guessing they don't
they
have a
don't
lot of books about their island.
they don't want to be on the map.
Yeah,
They just as soon remain anonymous because they're these are people that are very they're pretty crafty people. They're hip in those days, and yeah, they're hip and they're crafty and they're all kinds of people, lawyers and doctors and craftsmen and leather workers and carvers and you know everything and builders. And they helped me tremendously when I was out there, living there. Just with those, taking putting a house together from a ruin of a former cabin. Stuff like that. Anyhow, yeah. So I'm excited, and I'm on the eighth or ninth draft of it, and it just I know when to stop, but it just takes a lot of honing and make the words sing. It's really important to me to work for it. Because I mean, if I don't want you to wasting your time reading this book if it's not like poetry. You know,
yeah, yeah. So I can really tell that you're doing these eight and nine drafts because just by reading your story with, like you said, the laughing, the crying, the shock value, it's all there, and that's why I pictured it in my mind like a movie, and I'm like, this would be great as a movie too, and easily transfer over to a movie almost as is, and I appreciate that because that's really hard to do. And I write children's books. I'm going to get into non-children's books eventually, which I think is going to be a big leap and a big step. Maybe when I'm retired I'll have more time for that, but I can appreciate all the edits. I'm publishing for other authors, and 9 times, 10 times, 20 times, looking over it, and almost every time you have a fresh look, you're like, oops, I missed something there, or oops, I wanted to add something there, or that sentence is misplaced, let me move that, or let me add or take away. And so there's a lot of value to doing that, to galvanizing your craft, and it doesn't go unnoticed. So I really appreciate that because it's you take the extra steps to ensure that every page has value to it and that you didn't slack off anywhere. So I appreciate that.
thank you. And also, it helps to have a professional cover designer and formatter. And I know there's a lot of do-it-yourself things out there, to in those categories, but also a professional editor. I mean, I read it 10, 15 times to go through my drafts, and then I hand it to my wife before I ever send it to. And thank God she's not. This is not her genre. She reads historic fiction a lot, other things, romance stuff like that. But she does read my books, and she is not afraid to tell me to cut an entire chapter out. And had to get over that. I did. I With that first book, she told me get rid of this, or you got to rewrite this because You remember that show Don't Tell you taught me about? Well, it's you got to do that here. They call it an information dump, and sometimes you can disguise it in the form of dialogue, meaningless dialogue, except it's conveying story. And I try not to do that. So yeah, the best thing I can think of is the highest compliment is that it's like a screenplay, because that's the way I want it. That's what I like to read. That's why I didn't like the first 200 pages of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I love that book. I really did. I think he was gone by the time I read it. I'm talking about the Steg Larsson, the
Mhm.
author. But I noticed that, and it was at that conference where I met my Rich Krevlin, and they talked about it at the opening cocktail party about how everybody disliked the first 200 pages because there was all telling and no showing. And so I try to remember that.
Yeah.
Some even on my drafts, I'll say, "What have I just done? I just did. I just did what I tell people not to do."
Yeah. The
And
the viewers and readers want action, right? Opening scene action.
that's what's so great about an actual screenplay. It's all action and dialogue. Man, it's like a party. I haven't. I just never flipped into it. There are some people that just can't write prose like I do, and they just love writing screenplays. I mean, I read the Maltese Falcon, and I saw the movie, and I thought John Huston got paid for nothing because every word in the movie came from the book. It's like practically reading the book, And I thought, well, that's the way I like it. I like those guys, Dashiell Hammett, who wrote the Maltese Falcon, and Raymond Chandler, who wrote The Big Sleep. Those are the first guys. That when I came out of my shell as a doctor and decided or discovered that there were other kinds of writing besides technical writing, I just
Yeah.
fell in love with those guys. And the third one was Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote Perry Mason. They were all born in the 1800s, and they came to fame in the 1930s.
Yeah, interesting. I haven't read any of those. I have seen a lot of the movies, though, movie versions, although I know the books. I like to do the same, read the book first and then go to the movie and kind of compare. But definitely, yeah, I mean, that's, as authors, inspiration is really important. Also, the technical, not fun side of doing edits is important. Getting professional book covers is very important. Now I kind of reel when a indie author friend or someone mentions, "Oh, I did my own cover. I didn't do edits," and then I read their book and I find 10 or 20 misspellings,
Yeah,
glaring. It just, I could just kind of like cringe and I'm like, please just pay, a few $100 to do it. Like it's the longevity and the appreciation factor and, just the professionalism is just so much more worth it, with quality. And, it's basically what do you call it? uh, a job of passion and love, and you don't want to put a book out there that has 20 misspellings, and people will mention it in the comments in your reviews as well. So it's really important. And I work with a bunch of attorneys, so I have attorneys telling me, "Oh, I'll edit your books," and I did have one edit one of my author's books because her book is over 300 pages, and she went to law school and she's an English major. So it was really worth it because this attorney type picked up several edits that I would have never picked up. And, I appreciated editing even, that much more at that point. And, the author and myself are very happy with the product. So it is worth it. It's the same thing with illustrations and book covers. They're, having a professional illustrator do that, formatting, that kind of thing, it's worth it. And so I
I
appreciate that.
I just want to give a shout out to my the guy who does my book covers and my narration of my audiobooks, Steve Human. I think he's listening, but it's not that's not the reason I'm mentioning his name, because I really love these people that have helped me. And I have now got a variety that I did not have of consultants on my story. I have a woman lawyer and a man lawyer because my main character is becoming a lawyer, and I want to know what it looks like from her viewpoint. She is going to probably go into criminal law, and she has trouble making up her mind about offense versus defense, district attorney or a defense attorney. Then I have a gunsmith who talks to me about, I mentioned, and I have a martial arts expert still. He loved that book that I wrote based on his, and I never went back to his. I never went back to his studio for another lesson, but I mean, um, just really generous people, um, and it makes it fun for me. Especially when they send something back that I send them to read, and they tell me what's wrong with it or what I could do to make it better. So yeah, it's just I like respecting my readers' time, and I like making people emotion feel feel emotion like laughter and crying. It's really important to me to give people an experience, and yeah, I'm really happy that I found this. Um, Thank you, thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me.
Well, it was fun having you, Dr. Hirsch, and everyone, please check out Dr. Marc Hirsch on his website and his wonderful Alice Investigator series. I'm gonna be probably one of the first ones to buy his fifth book at www.marchirsch.com, marchirsch.com. I'll also put it in the comments below on YouTube and Facebook, and I will be editing this video and sharing it with you and your viewers to have on your page as well. And Dr. Hirsch, I hope to hear from you and do a follow up interview, maybe after your fifth book is out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, sir.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Thanks.